Chapter 3. The head steward, Octavius, sat at the large desk in the entry hall, looking utterly bored as he checked the records before him. The Frost family was already registered and assigned their rooms yesterday afternoon, he said in a monotone voice, barely looking at me. There must have been an error in the records. My assistant only wrote down 2 entries instead of 3. I maintained a polite smile and explained, I was delayed in my journey, and my sisters weren't sure if I would make it. I hope this doesn't cause any inconvenience. I made sure to keep my travel-worn cloak tightly wrapped around me. Its deep red fabric might have hidden the majority of the stains from Kodiak's blood, but it still looked dusty and dirty from the long journey. Octavius didn't seem particularly interested in my explanation. We don't have an extra suite available, he replied flatly. However, there should be an additional bed in your family's assigned rooms. He dipped his quill into the ink pot and made a quick note in the logbook. As he worked, I couldn't help but notice his rodent-like features. A small, pointed nose, ruddy cheeks, and sharp, beady eyes. That's no trouble at all, I lied smoothly, keeping my smile firmly in place. I'm just relieved to have arrived. After stamping his seal next to my name, Octavius handed me a packet of parchment. All the instructions are enclosed. The first ball begins this evening in the largest ballroom. You'll find signposts directing you there at sundown. Meals are served in the banquet hall, though breakfast has already finished, and you are free to explore the grounds. Daytime activities will be held in various rooms, and the schedule is included in your packet. Should you have any questions, feel free to ask me or any of the other attendants. Clutching the papers, I moved to a quiet alcove to gather my thoughts. My top priority was to prepare for the first ball that evening. I needed to find a way to wash up and make myself presentable, but that posed a challenge. Valencia, my stepmother, might still have the dress I originally packed if she hadn't discarded it already, but asking her for help was unthinkable. I bit my lip in frustration. I barely knew Jack, so I couldn't rely on him either. Pushing aside my worries about appearances, I decided that locating the records room was more urgent. I needed to retrieve my father's will, and I wasn't about to waste any more time. With determination, I strode down corridor after corridor, scanning the open rooms for any sign of scrolls or official documents. I paused when I saw a servant girl hurrying by, carrying a bundle of laundry. "Excuse me," I called out politely. "Do you know where the records room is?" She shook her head apologetically. "I'm sorry, miss. It's off limits, and I'm not a scribe." Undeterred, I asked a nearby guard the same question. He reiterated that the records room was restricted to senior staff and scribes. "However," he added cheerfully, "you're welcome to enjoy the other activities arranged for the guests. There's painting, for instance." Feigning interest, I asked, "What about dressmaking? Is that available?" The guard frowned thoughtfully. "Not that I've heard of, but there's needlepoint." I thanked him and continued my search. Every room I passed seemed filled with women painting, sewing, practicing dance steps, or chatting excitedly about the evening's ball. Their laughter and enthusiasm filled the air. I felt a pang of loneliness, wishing for a moment that I could share in their excitement with a friend or sister. But my stepsister Valia was hardly the type for companionship, and her mother and other sister were even worse. I focused on my task, determined not to let the vibrant atmosphere distract me. The castle was massive, with countless rooms and corridors, but surely the records room couldn't be that hard to find. My strategy was simple. Locate a scribe and convince them to retrieve the document for me. That shouldn't break any rules, or so I hoped. As the hours passed, I familiarized myself with much of the castle's layout. I discovered snow-covered courtyards, elegant guest rooms, and lively gathering spaces. The chatter from the guest rooms often revolved around the excitement of meeting the prince. While their energy was infectious, I couldn't afford to lose sight of my goal. By midday, I found myself circling the same areas repeatedly. The guard from earlier began eyeing me suspiciously, likely wondering why I was wandering alone for so long in a damp cloak and dress. Just as I was about to give up, I spotted a man sitting on a bench near a sunlit window. The scribe's distinctive cap marked him as my best chance. Summoning my courage, I approached him with a bright smile. "Good morning," I greeted him warmly. He looked up cautiously. "Good morning. How can I assist you?" "My father recently passed away," I began, choosing my words carefully. "I believe a copy of his will was sent to be stored in the records room. Would you be able to retrieve it for me?" "It's very important." The scribe frowned and shook his head. "I'm sorry, but I can't help you. All non-essential matters are postponed until after the prince's bride is selected. You'll have to wait until the conclusion of the balls." "A week would be too late," I protested, trying to keep my tone calm. "It's a quick request, and I need it to renew my school's license. Please?" He gathered his papers, clearly annoyed. "My apologies, but the answer is no. The records room is restricted, and everyone is too busy with the current events." Before I could argue further, he walked away, leaving me standing in the corridor with growing despair. I clenched my fists, refusing to give up. My students depended on me, and I wasn't about to fail them. After exhausting all options above ground, I ventured down the stone steps leading to the castle's lower levels. The dimly lit corridors had an eerie stillness, but I pressed on. The records room had to be here. Eventually, I found a large window overlooking rows of shelves filled with scrolls and documents. My heart leapt with excitement. This was it. I scanned the shelves hungrily, searching for any sign of Cedric Frost's will. It had to be here somewhere. Following the windowed wall, I found a door marked Records, Restricted. I tried the handle, but it was locked. Undeterred, I searched for alternative entrances, but every door was similarly secured. When I heard approaching footsteps, I quickly retreated, not wanting to be caught near a restricted area. Back on the main floor, the smell of food led me to the dining hall. Small sandwiches, roasted chestnuts, and other light fare were laid out on silver platters. Despite my hunger, I kept my cloak wrapped tightly around me, feeling self-conscious about my disheveled appearance. If I met the prince now, I was certain he'd send me away without a second thought. I was so hungry I could have devoured an entire feast, but my thoughts kept drifting back to the grim situation that weighed on my shoulders. My students' faces, full of hope and trust, filled my mind, reminding me of my responsibility toward them. I picked at my food, barely tasting it. I couldn't shake the haunting image of them being sent home by the marshal. It made my stomach twist. The clock was ticking, and I had only 6 days to renew the school's license before it expired. If I failed, the school would be shut down, and my students would be left with nothing. The thought made me feel utterly helpless. But the problem was, I had no way of raising the necessary funds to get the license renewed. The money required was a fortune, and my resources were nowhere near enough. If the license expired, there would be months of legal battles, petitions, and endless paperwork, draining me both financially and emotionally. The thought of it made me feel sick. And to make things worse, Valencia, a wealthy and influential figure, had chosen this exact moment to demand the renewal. Why had it come to this? Amidst these overwhelming thoughts, I saw a familiar face sitting at the table opposite me. A girl with fiery red hair, her eyes dull and lifeless as she poked at her food absent-mindedly. Trista. Her demeanor mirrored my own. She looked as exhausted and troubled as I felt. "Trista! Is that really you?" I asked, barely believing my eyes. She looked up from her plate in surprise and then dropped her fork. "Noelle, I didn't expect to see you here." I gave her a small smile. "Nor I you. Aren't you the one engaged to the blacksmith's apprentice?" Her expression changed, and she looked down at her food, her face falling. I was. My parents forced me to break it off and come here. I furrowed my brows, confused. What did Cal say about that? She shrugged, offering a faint smile. He said I should try getting sent home quickly so we can get engaged again. She leaned in closer, lowering her voice to a whisper. I'm planning to make a terrible impression on the prince tonight. I'll pick my nose, burp loudly, and scratch myself in front of him. That should do the trick. I laughed, a genuine laugh that was rare these days. That's a brilliant plan, Trista. I'm sure it'll work wonders. Maybe we should both give up on this evening and just be ourselves. At least we won't disappoint anyone that way. She grinned. I was thinking the same thing. But on a serious note, Noelle, why haven't I seen you at any ice skating competitions lately? I hesitated before answering. I gave it up. I've been too busy. I opened a school for mages 2 years ago, and my father, well, he passed away not long ago. Trista's eyes widened in shock. I'm so sorry. Noelle, I didn't know. I nodded, the familiar ache in my chest tightening. It's okay. It was a difficult time, but my stepmother made sure his passing was kept quiet. No one knew, not even the king or queen, though they were close to him. Trista looked at me with sympathy. If there's anything I can do, just let me know. You don't have to go through this alone. I sighed, my eyes meeting hers. Actually, there is something. Can I stay in your room tonight? I don't have anywhere else to go, and I need to borrow a dress for the evening. I don't have anything proper to wear. Trista's face softened, and she immediately nodded. Of course. Come with me. I'll also get your clothes cleaned and send them to the tailor. Where are you staying? Nowhere, I replied quietly. It's a long story. As we made our way to her room, I filled Trista in on everything. My father's death, the school's looming closure, and my struggle to get the license renewed. She listened intently, her face changing with each twist and turn of my story. When I mentioned Jack, the young mage who had helped me, her eyebrows raised with curiosity. A young man, you say? She teased, her lips curling into a mischievous smile. I frowned. Nothing is going on between us. He's a mage, and I've already gotten myself into enough trouble by letting him help me. Well, you can't just let him go, not with all that help, Trista said seriously. And you know what? I think it wouldn't hurt if you looked stunning tonight. Maybe the prince will take notice of you and lend you a hand with your school's renewal. I don't want to marry the prince, I replied firmly. I won't use someone just to solve my problems. I need to find my father's will to fix everything. That's the only way forward. Trista paused, as if weighing my words. Have you met the prince yet? She asked. No, I answered, feeling a twinge of nervousness. I've never had the chance. My father always left me behind on his trips to the palace. Well then, keep an open mind, Trista said with a wink, unlocking her door and ushering me inside. Her room was warm and cozy, and Trista's parents were sitting by the fireplace. Her mother greeted me with a warm hug, but her father didn't seem as pleased to see me. Well, well, Noelle, he said gruffly. First you're off ice skating, and now you're here with my daughter. What's next? The prince himself? I smiled nervously. No, sir, I'm just borrowing a dress for tonight. Trista, sensing the tension, jumped in. Papa, it's no trouble. She needs something presentable, and I'm more than happy to help. Her father didn't seem convinced, but didn't press the issue further. Trista quickly led me to her enormous wardrobe filled with beautiful dresses. She held up a delicate pale pink gown. This would look wonderful on you, Noelle, she said. It'll go perfectly with your hair. I'm jealous. It suits you much better than it does me. I smiled, feeling a bit overwhelmed by her generosity. I don't know what to say, Trista. Thank you. We spent the next few hours getting ready. Trista helped me into the gown, and we both laughed as we made last-minute adjustments. Afterward, we sent my old clothes to be cleaned, and I felt a small weight lifted from my shoulders. As we walked to the ballroom together, I couldn't help but feel nervous. What if my stepmother is there? What if she finds out I'm not with her? I murmured, anxiety creeping in. She probably won't notice, Trista said, her voice full of confidence. And anyway, you don't have to worry about her tonight. You're here for yourself. The ballroom was everything I'd imagined and more. Crystal chandeliers glittered above us, casting soft light on the guests below. The orchestra played a beautiful melody. And all around us, people laughed and danced in elegant gowns and suits. I don't see your step-family, Trista remarked, scanning the room. They're probably still getting ready, I said quietly. Trista laughed. How long does it take them to get ready? Hours, I muttered. My stepmother is always checking herself in the mirror. What did your father think of her? Trista asked, her voice softer now. I shrugged. He thought she was perfect, that she could do no wrong. He'd always tell me she could take as long as she wanted. Trista raised an eyebrow, her tone turning teasing. Men, they'll forgive anything for beauty. I smiled softly, remembering my father's kind words. It's fine. She made him happy, and that's what matters. With a final sigh, I glanced around the ballroom, preparing myself for whatever lay ahead. It was a night full of uncertainty, but I knew one thing for sure. I wouldn't let anything stand in the way of saving my school. Trista nudged me and pointed at the door where Valia and Vanessa had just walked in. They were incredibly beautiful, wearing fancy gowns that were in the latest fashion. It was clear they had spent a lot of time getting ready. Their hair was perfectly styled, and their makeup made their faces look flawless. The prince will never look at me now, not compared to them, I heard a girl behind me say sadly. Of course he will. Trista smiled at the girl with long, curly brown hair. What's your name? Jasmine. I'm Trista, and this is my friend Noelle. Those are her stepsisters who just came in, and I waited for Valencia to join my stepsisters, but she didn't show up. Maybe she wants her girls to seem independent without a parent around, Trista said, reading my thoughts as she looked at the door. My father said so, which works well for me. Now I can be as unladylike as I want, and Papa won't even know. She whispered to Jasmine, sharing her plan to mess up her chances with the prince, which made Jasmine laugh. Uh-huh, I replied, distracted, still watching my stepsisters as they moved through the ballroom, greeting people with smiles on their faces. At one point, Vanessa looked across the room and I stiffened, but she didn't seem to notice me. It was amazing how much beauty she had, even though her personality was horrible. If I accused her of anything, it would only look like I was a jealous competitor. Do you want to talk to them? Trista asked quietly. Not now, I said, still watching as Valia laughed at something a nobleman said. The man seemed very proud of himself. For the rest of the time before the ball officially started, I walked around the crowded ballroom with Trista and Jasmine, trying to avoid my stepsisters. If Vanessa wasn't there, I might have talked to Valia, but I didn't trust her when her sister was around. My stepmother still hadn't shown up, and I wondered if she really wanted her daughters to be without their mother nearby. It was possible, though I'd never known her to miss a chance to get close to anyone wealthier or more important than herself. As the orchestra moved from tuning their instruments to playing actual music, the tension in the room grew. Some girls were shaking with excitement, and I could see sweat on their foreheads. Ah, Lady Noelle, you're here. Good, good, a steward named Octavius said as he ran around with a stack of papers, marking names as he found the girls. And Lady Trista and Lady Jasmine. You're here too. I trust you're all settled in? He didn't wait for us to answer and quickly rushed away. He moved like a rodent. His feet shuffled quickly, and his large belly never slowed him down. The herald chose that moment to blow his trumpet, and everyone went silent. "Their Royal Majesties," he announced loudly, "King Wenceslas, Queen Isolde, and their son Prince Stephen." The crowd clapped as the royal family entered. King Wenceslas had gray hair and was shorter than expected, but his broad shoulders showed he had spent years training in the military. Queen Isolde had more wrinkles than her husband, but her smile made her seem younger than she was. Prince Stephen looked just as I imagined a prince would look. He was tall with his father's broad shoulders, but he didn't have his mother's charm. His face looked serious and almost bored. I thought, with so many women eager to marry him, he could have at least smiled. He was handsome, but I liked Jack's rougher looks better than Stephen's perfect appearance. As soon as Stephen walked down the stairs, a sea of pastel-colored dresses surrounded him as the girls all tried to be the first to dance with him. I don't think anyone heard the other announcements, but I did. Many names were read aloud: the Chancellor, the Treasurer, Lord Chamberlain, and Master-at-Arms. Then came a long line of advisors, and I kept my eyes on the entrance until finally, "Royal Advisor Jack," the herald announced as a man walked in. He didn't give his full name, which made me curious. What was his last name? If it weren't for the white hair and bright blue eyes, I might not have recognized him. Gone were the snow boots, old brown furs, and messy hair. He was wearing a sharp suit, and his hair was neatly combed. Every bit of dirt was gone, and he looked like a real royal advisor now. My heart raced just seeing him. Maybe a perfect appearance wasn't so bad after all. Jasmine gasped. "He's a mage," she whispered. "I've never met one before." Across the room, I saw Vanessa give Valia a pointed look before curling her lips into a fake smile directed at Jack. This made me feel more uncomfortable than the glares she always threw my way. The ball began. Many of the men asked the women to dance, and I spotted Jack sitting at a far table, taking notes on some official-looking papers. Other advisors whispered in his ear after dancing with each girl. One by one, Octavius went to find the girls and lead them to be introduced to the royal family. Jasmine was one of the first, and she waved nervously at us as she was taken away. I was invited to dance twice by two different advisors, and I said yes each time. While I was better at ice skating than dancing, the two activities had enough in common that I was able to dance well enough. The advisors asked about my family, hobbies, and interests, and after the dance, they bowed to me and whispered something to Jack. I caught Jack's eye once, and I almost winked, but he didn't show any sign that he remembered me. I was a little disappointed. Even though I knew he had to keep his professional image, I had hoped he would at least acknowledge that we had met before. Trista passed by, deliberately stepping on her partner's feet. He tried to smile politely, but his face showed that he was uncomfortable. "Lady Noelle, you're next," Octavius said in a quiet voice. "Follow me and wait to be introduced." I followed him to the stage where the royal family stood. The queen, who was at the front of the line, looked at me even before they called my name. "You're Lord Cedric Frost's daughter, aren't you?" she asked. I was surprised that the queen knew my name. I stammered, Yes, Your Majesty. How—" "Oh, I never forget a face," she said with a cheerful laugh. "It's very helpful when I meet so many people. You look just like your father. I knew him well." "Thank you." At that moment, the herald announced, "His Highness, Prince Stephen." I curtsied to the prince, who looked exactly like his father. He had dark hair, dark eyes, and strong eyebrows, just like the king. "Lady Noelle Frost," the herald said loudly. "Daughter of the late Lord Cedric Frost." Prince Stephen bowed. He looked serious. "I was sorry to hear about your father's passing." "He will be greatly missed. My deepest condolences. Thank you, Your Highness. He always spoke highly of you. I look forward to speaking with you again, he said, but his tone was a little distant, and he already looked at the next girl in line. I wanted to stay in the competition until I had my father's will, so I decided to ask, "What are your interests, Your Highness?" Prince Stephen glanced at me again. His voice was polite, but his words seemed rehearsed. "I enjoy badminton, dancing, and archery. What about you?" "I like ice skating, teaching, and I love dogs." The prince's attitude changed slightly. He nodded as if he was genuinely interested. "You should meet my advisor then." He turned to Jack and waved for him to come over. "He trains dogs." Jack stood up from the table where he had been sitting and walked toward us. I couldn't help but smile when I saw him. I raised my hand as Jack reached out to shake mine. But instead of shaking my hand, he kissed my knuckles. It made my heart skip a beat. Prince Stephen raised his eyebrows. "I never told you his name. Have you two met before?" Jack's usual calm expression melted away. His bright blue eyes sparkled with a playful look. I looked at Stephen innocently. "He was introduced earlier in the evening." Stephen smiled, clearly relieved. "Ah, yes, I had forgotten. You must have a great memory just like my mother." "It was a pleasure meeting you, Noel. I look forward to seeing you again soon." He kissed my hand before moving on to the next person. After a quick introduction to King Wenceslas, I walked back with Jack to his table. "You did it," Jack whispered, carefully covering his notes. "You passed. Just don't tell the others I told you. You're not supposed to know yet." "What exactly did I pass? Mr. This isn't a competition?" I whispered back. I can't tell you. That's against the rules. I'll need all of tomorrow to go through the notes on all the women, but you can trust that you'll be allowed to stay." It sounds like a lot of work, going through all those notes. I glanced around to make sure no one was nearby. I found the records room earlier, but it was locked. "It's always locked," Jack said. He paused for a moment and then said quickly, "I'll be reviewing the notes tomorrow in the library. If you want to join me, we can talk about the ice skating lesson you owe me. Also, some scribes work in the library. Since the records room is off limits, you might be able to find something in the library, like books about inheritances or other things." "That sounds like a great idea. I'll be there." As we walked away, I saw Trista again. She pretended to stumble and fall as she approached Prince Stephen. Afterward, she acted like she was picking something from her teeth before she shook hands with him. Prince Stephen smiled politely. But after she left, he quickly wiped his hand on his handkerchief and tucked it back into his pocket.